Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Finals Hall stage. I am Hannah Shantz from Fallston, Maryland, and I will be your host. The Agricultural Issues Forum is the next event featured on the National Finals Hall stage. In this event, a team presents a discussion on a topic affecting their local community. This program is designed to increase the general public's awareness of issues facing American agriculture and the connections that these issues have to the local community. To accomplish the task, discussions on specific issues are integrated into the classroom curriculum. Students learn to analyze these issues and present positions on them. They are required to share their findings that they have researched with others in the community through a forum style of presentations prior to this competition. The 4 finalist teams have developed a portfolio and will deliver a presentation that outlines both the pros and cons of their selected issue. The team will defend their findings through a series of questions from judges while utilizing their verbal and presentation abilities. The Agricultural Issues Forum is sponsored by Elanco Animal Health and Syngenta. The responsibility that comes with being a judge is not taken lightly. We are honored to have with us a group of well-respected and knowledgeable individuals in this event. Judges, will you please stand as your name is called? Mr. Gary Fuller, Elanco Animal Health. Ms. Dana Parrott, Cooperative Extension Service. Ms. Laurie Garkovich, University of Kentucky College of Agriculture and Food and Environment. Mr. Bruce By, National Ag Issues Committee member. Timing of presentations is also critical. Our timekeeper today is Dr. Randall Williams of Texas A&M Kingsville. Please join me in thanking our judges and timekeeper. Audience, through this event, we ask that you please observe a few basic rules to ensure that the event runs smoothly and provide a fair environment for all participants. Please take a moment to turn off or silence all electronic devices, including cell phones. Once Courtesy Corps seals the doors, please remain quiet and stay seated. If you must step out, please wait to do so in between presentations. Thank you for your cooperation. With the Courtesy Corps, please secure the doors. Are our judges ready? Our first team is from the Amanda Clear Creek FFA chapter in the state of Ohio. Team members include Emma Dirth, Harrison Poor, Noah Smith, Julian Scott, Paige Henton, and Aaron Sharp.
No matter your viewpoint, it cannot be denied that neonicotinoids have revolutionized the way we combat agricultural pests around the world.
However, the impact of neonics on pollinator populations can be directly tied to colony collapse disorder.
By 2050, the responsibility of feeding the nearly 10 billion people that will inhabit this earth relies on the shoulders of farmers like me and the use of modern agricultural technology, including the use of neonics.
In spite of the need to feed this growing population, it is imperative to me that the food that my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will consume is safe.
Let's envision life just 33 years from now, the year when the world's population is projected to reach an all-time high of 9.7 billion people. Take a moment to consider your lifestyle now. What could change? What could the future hold? If the world's population continues to increase, as it's predicted to, major tension could occur in the lives of people everywhere. We know that the agriculture industry will have to overcome a variety of factors pertaining to food production due to the demands of a growing population.
In 1962, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, documented the detrimental effects on the unregulated use of pesticides on the environment. The book was met with criticism by chemical companies, and it spurred a reversal in national pesticide policy, including a ban on DDT, because of its ability to become concentrated in animals at the head of the food chain. The book also prompted the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, where I'm employed.
Good afternoon. We represent the Amanda Clear Creek FFA chapter from the state of Ohio, and today we're here to speak with you about pesticide use, specifically how neonicotinoids have impacted our environment and the bee population. In the 1960s, when Carson's book was published, the world population was at 3 billion. Just 40 years later, in 2000, the world population had doubled to 6 billion. And by 2050, the world population is projected to be at nearly 10 billion people. The responsible use of pesticides would be essential to protect crops needed to produce food to feed our growing world population. As a United States Department of Agriculture employee, I know that one of the most effective classes of insecticides are neonicotinoids, or neonics as they are often called. This relatively new class of insecticide was introduced in the 1990s to replace older and more damaging chemicals like DDT. They are absorbed into every cell in a plant and affect the central nervous system of the insect, resulting in paralysis and death, thus eliminating the pest and allowing the crop to thrive.
While the use of neonics may be an effective method of pest control, we must understand that not all the insects affected by neonics are indeed pests. In fact, some are beneficial, and their demise could greatly affect our ability to grow crops to feed the growing world population. When pollinators, such as honeybees, are exposed to neonics, it interferes with their ability to learn and then remember. A study in the UK shows that bees are unable to learn and then remember floral smells associated with the sweet nectar reward, which is an essential skill for bees in search of food. Also, according to the University of Georgia, 75% of the world's crops benefit to some degree from animal pollination. Additionally, the global demand for animal-pollinated crops is increasing faster than the demand for non-pollinated staples.
Today we unfold on a scene between two consumers at the grocery store. One is a local farmer, and the other is a concerned wife and mother.
I noticed that you are wearing a chemical company shirt. I can't believe that you would promote a company that is responsible for the poisoning of our food supply.
What makes you say that?
I am committed to feeding my precious daughter and family organic fruits and vegetables without any pesticide residue on them. The company that you were advertising on your hat clearly does not care about the safety of what we eat. And I read that the chemical clothianidin, a neonicotinoid, is responsible for the loss of more than 50% of bee populations.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I am a local corn and soybean farmer, and the safe and responsible use of pesticides, including neonics, ensures that I can produce a bountiful crop to provide food for our growing U.S. and world populations, including your family. Less than 1% of total agricultural land in the United States is managed organically, and pesticides that are not synthetically manufactured are commonly used on organic farms. So just because you are buying pesticide-free, just because you are buying organic does not mean that you are buying pesticide-free.
But at least those pesticides are not synthetic. A study from Natural News said that a European Food Safety Authority report found a class of crop pesticides previously linked to causing mass bee deaths to be also inherently harmful to humans. Researchers from the FFA determined neonicotinoid pesticides, acetamiprid and imidacloprid in particular, obstruct the normal development and functions of the human nervous system, as well as damage brain functions and structures and the cells.
I understand your concerns. However, the use of pesticides is necessary to grow crops effectively. According to a study published by the Indian Ecological Journal, food plants of the world are damaged by more than 10,000 species of insects. And a report from the Food and Agricultural Organization says that herbivorous insects are responsible for destroying 1/5 of the world's total crop production annually. For example, the average pesticide takes an average of 10 years to research and develop, typically requiring over 120 separate studies before gaining approval to be released onto the market. Meanwhile, very stringent testing regimens are continuously being refined and improved.
We just heard from our local farmer and apprehensive consumer as they voiced their viewpoints. While our consumer is justified in her concerns about the safety of the food she's feeding her family, the farmer also makes valid points about being able to effectively produce food to feed our growing world population. This conversation, however, goes beyond the grocery store. Our next scene takes place at a county extension pesticide training. Our speaker for today is a scientist representing Bear Crop Science Limited, and the other is a concerned local beekeeper.
Thank you for attending our pesticide training. Are there any questions?
Mr. Sharp, I am a local beekeeper, and I am concerned about the effect of neonics on my hives. A professor from the University of Sussex in England claims that neonics are 5,000 times more toxic to bees than DDT. He has shared several studies that overwhelmingly found negative effects on bumblebee colonies and behavior. If they have this effect on bumblebees, could they pose the same threat to the honeybee population? And according to the USDA, 10 million beehives have been lost since 2006, representing a $2 billion cost to beekeepers like myself. Bees are responsible for much of the pollination required for agricultural production. The USDA estimates pollinator services to be worth $20 to $30 billion annually. Further, honey and bee products have also suffered, with 2013 being the lowest U.S. honey production year ever recorded, and that was also a $38 million drop since 2012. The most significant decline in honeybee production has occurred in the Corn Belt, where neonicotinoid use is highest.
While the findings in the UK study are concerning, they involve the pesticide being applied directly to the brains of the pollinators. The findings of laboratory-based studies should not be automatically extrapolated to the field. If you take an insecticide and you give it directly to an insect, I can guarantee that you'll have an effect. I'm not at all surprised that this is what you will see. However, what is really important is seeing what happens in real situations, in real fields, in real bee colonies, in real beehives, with real beekeepers like yourself.
You stated that these pesticides are safe for the environment. An article found in the Idaho Observer states that between 50 and 90% of all bee populations have been lost, and one of the major causes listed is the use of the insect neurotoxin clothianidin, a pesticide produced by your company to control rootworm in corn. Bees are responsible for pollinating about 1/3 of the human diet, including almonds in California, blueberries in Maine, cucumbers in North Carolina, and 85 other commercial crops, according to the USDA. Not finding a cause to the collapse could prove costly.
Actually, a recent study by the USDA has shown that bee populations have increased over the past 10 years. By controlling the impacts of pests and diseases, pesticides help maximize agricultural productivity and ensure the food supply meets the demand of a rapidly growing population. The evaluation of pesticides from a bee safety perspective makes use of study protocols and guidelines developed by experts. What really matters in this cascading process is the interaction between a bee and a pesticide in real field situations. In some cases, avoiding or minimizing effects may be as simple as not spraying when the crop is flowering. My company conducts in-depth research into the characteristics of both pesticides and pesticidal biotech crops from an early stage to ensure that they do not have any negative impact on non-target species, like the honeybees, and develops the specific label instructions according to which the products can be safely applied.
We just heard from a local beekeeper whose livelihood relies on the health and safety of his bees, and a renowned scientist who believes in the benefits of neonics and how they will contribute to crop production to feed our growing world population. Both have made valid points.
According to the US EPA, clothianidin has the potential for toxicronic exposure to honeybees, as well as other non-target pollinators through the translocation of clothianidin residue in nectar and pollen. The fate and disposition of clothianidin in the environment suggests a compound that is a systemic insecticide that is persistent and mobile, stable to hydrolysis, and able to leach to groundwater as well as run off the surface waters. In honeybees, the effects of this toxic chronic exposure may include lethal and/or sublethal effects in the larvae and reproductive effects in the queen. The use of neonics must be heavily regulated to ensure that there are no long-term negative effects.
The USDA announced that honey production, which had been disrupted after colony collapse disorder devastated the bee population 10 years ago, continues to improve and is now increased up to 14%. The total number of hives has also increased again by 100,000 or 4%. But more to the point as to the acrimonious debate over whether and how much neonics are impacting bee health, the total number of hives today is higher than it was in 1995 when neonics had just been introduced on the market.
As long as the food supply is safe for my family and future generations, I will be supportive of the use of modern agricultural products.
I am committed to using sound scientific developments in the field of agriculture, which include pesticides safe for our environment and those who inhabit our great planet.
The health of pollinators, including my honeybees, will help to ensure that enough food will be available to feed our growing world population.
The scientific community is committed to the safe development of new agricultural technology that will increase the efficiency of food production around the world.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts so we may better understand this debate. While there's still apparent differences on the best way to control the insects while protecting the bee population, the conversation that took place here today gave us, as consumers, producers, scientists, and government agency representatives, a more encompassing view on the issue.
The Amanda Clear Creek FFA chapter from the state of Ohio would like to thank you for your time and will now answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. My question is about, are there any effective substitutes for the use of neonics? And secondly, what are the substitutes, effective substitutes, for pollination by bees?
Okay, so to answer the first part of the question, you asked about effective substitutes for neonicotinoids.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So neonicotinoids, as we mentioned in the presentation, are the most effective classes of insecticide that we are using today. The only one that can be compared to it was DDT, which was used back in the early 1960s. And this was obviously very damaging to vertebrates. So we decided to use neonics. They are still effective, but they're harming bee populations. The only thing that can be in comparison to neonics is organophosphates, which is another class of insecticide. However, this is not as effective as neonics are. We're still trying to find a substitute or some kind of happy medium that will suffice for this issue.
And what about substitutes for pollination by bees?
Well, there's plenty of other pollinators out there, but none of them can just do the same job that the bee can. There's your wasps and your butterflies, but the bee is going to take up so much more of that pollination. Without the bees, there simply will be no way for us to pollinate the amount of crops that we need pollinated.
The use of bees to pollinate crops that we have today has become very industrialized or commercialized, you might call it. The bees have an ability to pollinate a lot more than any other creature that we currently have, such as wasps, bees, butterflies. Also, the bees are less aggressive than wasps are, and they can pollinate a lot more. The bees themselves are easy to transport. They bring them around on trucks occasionally to take them to large farms around the country to use them to pollinate the crops in those areas. And as a result, there are no current replacements for bees in the pollination field.
To add on to what Aaron said.
Thank you. That's enough on that question.
Sorry.
I have a question for you about in your county or state, how are neonics used? What crops are they used on, and how extensively are they used?
Well, in our county, in Fairfield County, there's 207,000 acres of croplands, as well as 52 apiaries. So it's really important to us that we're able to find this equal between our bees and our crops and our farmers and our beekeepers. And one of the middle grounds we could use, one of the moderators, would be the bee registry. It allows these farmers and beekeepers to work together to regulate when the beekeepers need to let their bees out or when the farmers need to be spraying their crops.
In our local area, we tend to use neonicotinoids on our soybeans and our corn, which are our top commodities. Imidacloprid in general, which is one of the chemicals of neonicotinoids, are going to be used for our soybeans more commonly, and clothianidin is going to be used for our corn.
As Paige mentioned, the bee registry, the U.S. EPA, as I portrayed in my part of the presentation, we're trying to find a balance in between the farmers and the apiculturists, because like in the world, the farmers need pesticides in order to produce a bountiful crop, but the apiculturists need the bees in order to pollinate these crops, because as I said, according to the University of Georgia, 75% of the world's crops benefit from pollination. So pollination is definitely required, but also the use of pesticides is necessary in order to produce a bountiful crop.
Okay, my question is, if we were to ban neonics, like some people want, what's the economic impact on our crops?
In one of our 16 forums, we talked with Senator Troy Bolderson, and he explained to us that even if we were to ban neonics, that there are still other contributors to colony collapse disorder, such as overwintering, the varroamite, the tracheomite, and they're actually kind of larger players in the game because neonics are only responsible for about 10% of colony collapse disorder as we know today, and that is, I believe, according to the University of Tennessee. So. Basically, if we were to ban neonics, we would still experience colony collapse disorder from the other mites and overwintering, just like they experience in the United Kingdom, where neonics are in fact banned, but they're still seeing colony collapse disorder.
Thank you. For the representative from Bayer, I understand part of your proposed solution is to ask for application not to be made when the plant is flowering. What evidence do you have that individuals will in fact follow label instructions, and is it practical with plants flowering at different times for that to really be a solution?
One way you can solve that problem, of course, you can't always rely on the individual to apply their pesticide when you want them to do it. However, rather than using the traditional spray method that's commonly used, you can use what's called a seed coating. This is clothianidin on wheat. As you can see, it's pink, unlike another grain that we have up here. If you use the seed coating, it's going to grow up into the plant as it matures. And unlike spray, it's not going to have the same runoff effect into the water that you have in your area. And it's, as a result, it's also not going to get in the air either. So you're not going to have it affecting the bees that might be passing through the area. So rather than relying on the individual to spray when you want them to, you could simply recommend to them or show to them that there is another option, and that would be the use of seed coating over the traditional spray method.
Okay. Thank you.
In the discussion, you talk about the difference, Representative from Bayer, between research that's done in the lab versus research that's done in the field, and you imply that research in the lab, maybe the results there are not as verifiable as they would be if they were in the field. Talk a little bit, explain a little bit more about how you see the difference between those two, especially given the fact that there's so much emphasis on lab results.
Yes. So your pesticides, like I said in the presentation, they were often applied directly to the brains of the pollinators. To explain a little more on neonicotinoids, why that's relevant is neonicotinoids attack the central nervous system of an insect, resulting in its paralysis and eventual death. That's why they would apply it to the brain to see what effects it would have on the insect that they're trying to study. In the field, however, you're not going to have the pesticide coming into direct contact with those bees depending on where they're at. Also, when they did the tests in the lab, I believe from the Ohio State University, the test used often larger doses than what the bees would come into contact naturally when passing through a field treated by neonicotinoids. Also, the pesticides would only be noted for the sprayed form because the bees themselves aren't normally going to consume the pollen from corn or soybean because they are self-pollinators. Bees will go after other plants first. As a result, the chances of a bee coming into contact with pesticides using on corn and soybeans are not as common.
You had quoted a certain number of bee colonies that are active in your county. How many of those have been impacted by neonics, if any?
The ones in Fairfield County where we live?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, there's 52 apiaries in our Fairfield County. And actually, Emma here and Harrison are both beekeepers themselves, and they both themselves have they've had to deal with colony collapse disorder, maybe not necessarily by neonicotinoid, which is why these studies are so hard to do because it's really hard to control the amount of land that you can cover in this and versus when those bees will actually come back, since the neonicotinoids will mess with their brain and stuff like that, and they will not remember simply where their home is. And it's just so hard to control all the factors that go into it, so it's not an exact number.
Bees typically stay, especially domesticated hives, they usually stay within a 3-mile radius of their hive. So that's one of the big factors in colony collapse disorder caused by neonicotinoids, that once they pass that 3-mile radius, it's very difficult for them to come back to the hive if they've been hurt by neonicotinoids.
And also, please understand that There's a lot of, ever since this topic has become very prevalent, there have been a lot of people such as Harrison and Emma that have just taken up backyard beekeeping or have been using it as like an SAE project for their chapter degree or whatever they might be using it for. So it's hard to get an exact number on how many hives have been affected by this because ever since this has become a topic that's been mediaized, there have been a lot of people that have been taking this on as like a backyard passion and might not necessarily have an exact number of who's been affected by CCD.
Well, I won't even finish because we're almost done.
Your time is complete. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for your time.
This concludes the first presentation of the Agricultural Issues Forum. We will provide time for stage reset and judges scoring. If you must exit the auditorium, please do so at this time. If you are just now joining us, please take a moment to silence all electronic devices, including cell phones. This is to ensure that all teams are provided a fair environment. Thank you for your cooperation. Would the courtesy corps please secure all of the doors and hallways? We will next continue with our second Agricultural Issues Forum presentation. To begin, I will be introducing our panel of judges and timekeeper. Judges, will you please stand as your name is called? Mr. Gary Fuller, Elanco Animal Health. Ms. Dana Parrott, Cooperative Extension Service. Dr. Laurie Garkovich, University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. Mr. Bruce Bai, National Agricultural Issues Committee's member. Our timekeeper today is Dr. Randall Williams, Texas A&M, Kingsville. Please join me in thanking our judges. Our second team to present today is from the Madisonville FFA chapter in the state of Texas. Team members include Matthew Longoria, Bethany Bolliard, Morgan Manning, Melinda Caperton, Avery Sims, and Landy Shipper.
Water, water, everywhere, but not a drop to drink.
This famous line from Samuel Taylor Coleridge is found in the 1798 poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The verse tells of a boat stranded in the middle of the ocean. It describes the irony of dying of thirst while being surrounded by miles and miles of water.
A shortage of drinkable water is not a problem unique to stranded ships. Our state constantly struggles with this same challenge. For example, even with all the moisture we have received this year, over 1,000 Texas public water supply systems are still under water restrictions. Like the ancient mariner, we deal with serious water shortages, all while living on a planet 72% covered with water.
The United States Geological Survey reports there is 326 quintillion gallons of water on Earth. But even this huge number is not as much as you think.
97% of the water on the planet is salty, and 2/3 of fresh water is locked in ice. This leaves only 1% ready for use. If the Earth were a basketball, its available fresh water would all fit inside of this marble. Scientist David Gallo said, all humanity depends on getting this teeny bit of fresh water in the right places at the right times in just the right amounts.
Missing this just right mark can be devastating. For example, during just 6 days in August, Hurricane Harvey pummeled Texas with 50 inches of rain. That's the equivalent of 2 weeks' flow over Niagara Falls. 185,000 homes were swamped, causing $125 billion in damage and the loss of 80 lives.
On the flip side, not enough water can be just as harmful. In 2011, Texas experienced the worst single-year drought of any state. Madison County endured 108 consecutive days without a single drop of rain. The drought spawned 23,000 wildfires across Texas and cost $7.6 billion in lost crops.
So how do we create balance when Mother Nature deals in extremes? This, of course, is the million-dollar question. But 2 Texas lawmakers feel they have the million-dollar answer.
During the 2015 legislative session, Representative Lyle Larson sponsored House Bill 3298. This act would have studied the creation of a state water grid, a network of pipelines that would make water easily transferable across the entire state.
The concept mirrors the electrical grid that serves Texas. If demands for electricity exceed expectations in any region, power can be transferred from other parts of the state to fill the void. Correspondingly, connecting water resources would allow water to be transferred from areas that have it to areas that do not.
The idea gained significant support in the House, where House Bill 3298 passed with an 80% margin. But the idea stalled out in the Senate. Championed by Senator Charles Perry, the grid was reported favorably out of committee, but received no further action.
Even though this bill did not pass, the idea is far from being put out to dry. The House Natural Resources Committee has continued to hear testimony on this topic. And even without a legislative mandate, many Texas cities are building pipelines on their own.
So will building a state water grid balance our supply and keep our head above water? Or is this just a crazy pipe dream? We invite you to consider this question in today's hearing as a member of the Texas House of Representatives Natural Resources Committee.
Comments will be filed by municipal water planners and East Texas landowners. Perhaps today's proceedings will add some clarity to this gridlocked issue. Should we construct the conduit or get rid of the grid?
Water administrators have long used the saying, "Water is God's gift," but he forgot to lay the pipes. It's time we take responsibility to make sure all Texans have adequate water.
Access to water should not be defined by geography. In fact, in 2010, the United Nations affirmed that access to safe and clean drinking water is a basic human right. Denying another person this life-giving resource is beyond selfish. It's morally wrong.
As Texas' population rises to 51 million residents by 2070, we will need 22 million acre-feet annually. Yet existing supplies will only provide 14 million acre-feet. In other words, for every 3 gallons of water that we need, we will only have 2 available.
Sadly, we seem to be doing progressively worse at building new supply in a time we desperately need to do better. Only 9 reservoirs were built across Texas in the last 30 years. This is pathetic compared to the 179 added in the previous 30. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave Texas a grade of D- for their water infrastructure. Building new supply is no longer optional. It's a critical necessity.
Part of this problem is that our state has taken a fend-for-yourself approach to water management. In 1997, 16 different planning regions were created. Each evaluates the projected demand for the next 50 years and recommends strategies to obtain the needed water.
With so many plans and conflicting ideas, very few recommendations are ever carried to reality. The time has come for us to set aside our regional agendas and work together for the good of Texas as a whole.
Work together is clever code speak for let us come and still you blind. East Texas typically receives 30 to 40 inches of rainfall per year. West Texas receives an average of 10 inches. The share and share alike wording is just feel-good propaganda. We all know which direction the water will be sent. For the last 15 years, 80% of our state's population growth has occurred in the 4 largest metropolitan areas. Cities will need an additional 3 million acre-feet by the year 2070, while agricultural consumption rates continue to drop. When it comes to water, rural areas are the givers, while urban areas are the takers. East Texas is blessed to be home to the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer, the 2nd largest in the state. But this further enlarges the bullseye that is now on our backs. East Texans who have worked for years to protect this reserve are now facing a cruel game of use it or lose it. Greedy developers can't wait to snatch up our water. And to clarify the term our water,
is not just how we see it. Local residents usually have older permits, meaning Texas law places our rights as senior to outside claims. And Senate Bill 332, passed in 2011, makes it crystal clear that I own the water directly beneath my property.
Regional planning was created to allow for local control. Moving water undermines the work of those who know the area best. Decisions about East Texas should not be made in some banker's boardroom or by bureaucrats in Austin. They should be made here.
Bottom line, the grid creates a system of winners and losers. And you can bet that rural East Texas will always come out on the short end of the stick. I will not sit idly by while the entire state has free access to my water.
No one said anything about free. Urban areas are more than willing to pay you for your water. A perfect example is the Vista Ridge Pipeline. 3,400 landowners in Burleson County have already signed leases selling their water to San Antonio. Private landowners will collectively receive $5 million every year.
This extra cash can make a big difference to farmers and ranchers who often operate on very tight margins. The underground pipeline will not impair your ability to use your land. The only difference you will notice is an increase in your bank account.
This pipeline will not endanger the Carrizo Wilcox. This aquifer contains 12 times the amount of water of all Texas lakes combined. Currently, only 12.5% that can be safely withdrawn in this area is used each year.
All contracts fall within the pumping limits of the Post Oak Savannah Groundwater District. In other words, the body charged with protecting the health of this aquifer has already given their blessing.
Many small Texas towns are struggling as the oil business has slumped. The Texas Comptroller's Office has documented communities losing 40 to 70% in business and city revenue. The obvious solution is to trade something you have for something you need. In this case, water for money.
This plan is not only a means of sharing water, but a means of sharing wealth. The grid could likely be a small town's economic salvation. Financially, rural East Texas has much to gain as they serve big cities' powerful thirst.
We can't drink your money when our wells go dry. Vista Ridge is the perfect example of urban big shots manipulating people with money. San Antonio will take 44 million gallons of water each day, tripling the current pumping rate. Liberal permits may work in a good precipitation year, but will leave us high and dry in a drought.
You are not only taking a vital commodity, you're turning friendly neighbors into bitter enemies. Constant pumping can change underground pressures, making neighboring wells go dry. Instead of rewarding good environmental stewardship, water marketing encourages one landowner to take advantage of another.
And speaking of environmental irresponsibility, the grid provides no incentive for water conservation. They will simply transfer the water from an area who has used their supply with greater care.
There is nothing in your plan to account for what the water will be used for. Drinking and cooking are fundamentally different than washing your car. During the summer, up to 60% of municipal water in Texas is used for landscaping. Should I have to give up my water just so some guy in San Antonio can have a greener lawn?
Texas lawmakers need to learn from the mistakes of California. The once water-rich San Joaquin Valley has been sucked dry since the state built a pipeline to Los Angeles. Land once worth $7,200 per acre is now selling at half the price.
Ken Kramer, water specialist in the Sierra Club, says schemes such as these are costly, environmentally destructive, and pit one citizen against another. This never has been, nor will it ever be, the right approach for Texas.
With all due respect, we have expert opinions of our own. Models developed by research economist Keith Phillips show the grid will actually promote conservation. For every 1% increase in the price of water, consumption dropped 3%. Setting a price on water will reduce waste and efficiently use our finite supply.
Through public-private partnerships, construction can be financed without tax dollars. This is a bargain, especially compared to the cost of doing nothing. If we do not create new supply by 2070, Water shortages will cost our state $151 billion annually, and 1.3 million jobs will be lost. By acting now, we lock in today's prices for tomorrow's water.
Don't think for a minute that they are doing taxpayers any favors. House Bill 3298 would have spent $2 million on the study alone. The city of El Paso found that operating a pipeline would have cost 4 times more than desalination and 7 times the price of cleansing surface water. Claims that farmers will buy irrigation water from the grid are financially ridiculous.
Diverting water can also seriously impact wildlife. 90% of aquatic species depend on our highly productive rivers and bays. $6 billion in annual revenue and 109,000 jobs hang in the balance when we start messing with natural flow rates. And remember, we need to focus on water conservation and desalination, solutions that truly solve, not just change locations of the problem.
Well, did you soak it all in? Will building the grid leave us swimming in supplies or leave us dead in the water? As you decide how you will cast your committee votes, let's take one last look at each side's major points.
Our growing state will not survive if we do not plan now for water. It is our ethical responsibility to make sure all Texans have this essential resource, whenever and wherever it is needed.
Selling water will provide significant income to ranchers in rural areas while assuring water is used to its best possible advantage. Our state has everything to gain as we work together to secure life-giving water.
The state water grid hangs rural East Texas out to dry. Farmers will struggle to compete as cities help themselves to our water. The grid shifts the driving force in water planning from sound science to who is the highest bidder.
Simply moving water is not a long-term solution. It does not create new supply and does not encourage wise use of our resources. This plan sacrifices our needs to support wasteful urban habits.
It is obvious the feelings on both sides run deep. Will a state water grid give us water everywhere, or will it leave us without a drop to drink? As you pore over the facts, we trust you will draw the right conclusion of which argument truly holds water. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question relates to what position the livestock and crop associations in your state have taken on this, building this grid, like ranchers and producers and cotton growers and those kind of groups. How are they weighing in on this?
The way that they're weighing in on this is the grid will eventually, it does have the eminent domain, and so the ranchers and the farmers that own this land will not be able to say no to the grid. However, they do have easements that they get compensated for, but once they put this pipeline under the land, you can graze over it, but you can't build over it. And in that easement, it does state that the people who build this pipeline can come in at any point in time, and they can till up the land again, and they can put a bigger pipe in that ground. So to answer your question, they don't really have a say in what they can and can't do towards this pipeline because it does have eminent domain.
And if I could add on to what my partner said, they have a very strong opposing viewpoint on this topic because they feel that it is taking away from their land and their property. However, from the pros viewpoint, we feel that this water pipeline is going to be underneath your ground. You're still going to be able to graze over it. You can still raise crops over it. It does not affect the use of your land. So with this pipeline being underneath the ground, we feel that there shouldn't be an opposition to this pipeline, especially with, as my partner mentioned, you'll be getting money for the easements that it runs through your property. So even though they are opposing, we feel that there's very little argument to why they should be opposing.
Okay, so you mentioned that Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio kind of went above the legislative process and are doing their own pipeline projects. Will these, if they decide to do this grid, will these easily fit into that grid, or are they going to obstruct that and cost the state even more money?
Yes, ma'am. Well, it totally depends. For the example, we have the IPL pipeline, which runs from Lake Palestine to Dallas and Fort Worth. In that instance, the taxpayers are actually paying for the pipeline for the cities. The other example is the Pipeline 130, which runs from Burleson County to Austin. And in that instance, the citizens and the taxpayers are again paying for the pipelines for the city of Austin. And in the example of the Vista Ridge pipeline, which runs from Burleson County to San Antonio, that is actually a private entity that owns that pipeline called Blue Water Systems. And in that instance, Blue Water Systems is paying for the construction of that pipeline. So, but in 30 years, in the instance of the Vista Ridge, San Antonio Water Supply will actually obtain the Vista Ridge pipeline, and it will become part of the city of San Antonio. So yes, the cities can build on, and these pipelines will fit into a statewide grid. If other public individuals or public companies or other cities want to add on, they can connect these water pipelines.
Thank you. Part of the provisions of House Bill 3298 was to look at the feasibility of creating a water market. What are the keys to success of creating a water market?
Well, typically with the water market, you're selling to people who are either going to be using it for drinking, cooking, or things in their household, or you're going to be, which would be municipal people using the water, or you would be selling it to agricultural uses. So depending on who you're selling it to, it is essential that you need to make sure that the water is clean, that the water is safe, and that the water is where it is needed the most. So that is why we feel that the Texas water grid is something that is important to our state, because of how much rain East Texas gets compared to West Texas, there's hardly any room for agricultural or municipal growth in West Texas because they don't have enough water to go around. So if East Texas has extra water, why not transfer it to that other side of the state who desperately needs it? And so we feel that that is essential to water marketing, that keeping it clean and getting it where it is needed, when it is needed, is the most important thing to water marketing.
My partner is exactly correct.
That's okay, thank you. We'll move on.
Who will pay for the water and at what cost? In this set of responses to this last question, it makes me wonder, to what extent will this process deepen the economic differences, the inequalities, or in these communities that are buying the water? In other words, if I'm a low-income family, will I be able to afford to purchase this shipped-in water?
From the cons point of view, to answer your first question, for an example, we use the Vista Ridge pipeline. The company San Antonio will be paying the company about $1,800 per acre foot for that water. However, you mentioned that a low-income family, if they are selling their water, they are getting about $110 per acre foot. This just shows that these companies are only in it for the financial aspect of it. They're not looking at the people losing money from selling their water.
And to add on to what my partner said, with the Vista Ridge pipeline, for example, that will be pumping from Burleson County to San Antonio, there will be a 16% increase in water bills expected in San Antonio. With the continuous pumping of this aquifer that will be pumped to San Antonio, we expect the water bills to go up. So this creates a major problem with those who are less fortunate and do not have as much money, because their water bills will essentially be going up without their own approval.
However, from the pros point of view, we do feel that after transferring this water over to San Antonio, even though there will be a small increase on the price of water, it'll make water more readily available for those areas that need more water, not only because we're transporting it over there, but the increase in the price will also make people use it a lot smarter. With gas prices, as an example, when gas prices go up, people will begin to carpool, they'll begin to use their vehicles more wisely. It's the same thing with water. Whenever you begin to add a higher price on the water, people still will buy it. They'll still be able to afford it. It's just that they'll use it smarter and use it to a better advantage rather than just wasting it watering their yard.
Your question is, should we construct this grid or not? Do you have any estimates, or approximately what would it cost to construct this grid, and who should pay for that?
Well, essentially, just to give you an example of how much a pipeline, a grid like this would cost, is we give the example of the Vista Ridge pipeline, which runs from Burleson County to San Antonio. It is a 142-mile long pipeline, and just for the construction alone cost $884 million. And to run that for a 10-year process, it'll be $1.3 billion just to run that one pipeline over a 10-year process. So that just shows how much this pipeline could cost. It'll cost millions and billions of dollars just to construct this pipeline, especially if it's a statewide grid.
Okay, you mentioned in your presentation that 1.3 million jobs will be lost if something isn't done. What jobs are going to be lost from this?
Well, everything depends on water. The water was used to make the table that you're sitting at. Water was used to make the microphones, to run these lights, to make the paper. In fact, it takes 40 gallons of water just to make a single straw. So obviously, without water, this causes a decrease in jobs, because not only are you taking away a vital source of life, the human body is made up of 70% water. Humans can only go 3 days without water. So without that water, not only are you making people move out of the state to go find other jobs, but you're also causing jobs to go down, because if they don't have water at electricity plants to keep the machinery running and running smoothly without overheating, then those people lose their jobs, because the state has to pay other states to bring water over here so that we can keep those places moving, and then they don't have enough money to pay as many workers anymore.
With the Senate not even being willing to vote on the House bill, does this mean or indicate that the Senate does not consider this to be an important issue?
No, sir. It's not that the Senate didn't want to vote on it. It actually passed through the House of Representatives and the committee, and it got to the committee in the Senate, the Agricultural, Water, and Rural Affairs Committee in the Senate. However, it got put on the calendar by the calendar committee, but they didn't get to it that certain day, so they never got to vote on it in the Senate.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
This concludes our second Agricultural Issues Forum presentation. We will now allow time for judges to score and the stage to be reset. If you must leave the hall, please do so at this time.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Eli Marquez,
I'm Caleb Roberson.
and we are two FFA members from Galt High School.
Good dog.
I'm good. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Arath Chavez, and I am a farm laborer here in the Central Valley.
My name is Fabian Rodriguez, and I represent the thousands of California farmers.
Well, I'd be happy to share my thoughts on that very topic.
Well, if its effects on humans you're wondering about, kind of sounds weird. Sounds weird. Yes.
Good.
Welcome. If you are just now joining us, please take a moment to silence all electronic devices, including cell phones. This is to ensure that all teams are provided a fair environment. Thank you for your cooperation. Would the Courtesy Corps please secure all doors and hallways? At this time, I will be introducing our judges and timekeeper for today. Judges, as your name is called, please stand. Mr. Gary Fuller, Elanco Animal Health. Ms. Dana Parrott, Cooperative Extension Service. Dr. Laurie Gartrevic, University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. Mr. Bruce Bai, National Agricultural Issues Committee member. Our timekeeper for today is Dr. Randall Williams of Texas A&M Kingsville. Please help me in thanking our judges and timekeeper. Our third team in the Agricultural Issues Forum event is the Galt FFA chapter in the state of California. Team members include Caleb Roberson, Yamilet Diaz, Fabian Rodriguez, Claire Nelson, Ana Eli Marquez, and Ereth Chavez.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Eli Marquez,
And I'm Caleb Roberson.
and we are two FFA members from Galt High School. Today, we are here at the Galt Farmers Market to do some research for a class project on the new California law, the Phase-In Overtime for Agricultural Workers Act of 2016, known to most people as Assembly Bill 1066.
Thus far, we've gathered quite a bit of background information. So let's begin with a recap of some history. In 1938, the U.S. Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which established the minimum wage, record-keeping, child labor standards, and overtime pay eligibility. But the FLSA did not include agricultural workers. The California Labor Code was silent on the issue of overtime for agricultural employees until 1941, when the legislature specifically exempted agricultural workers from the statutory requirements of overtime, similar to the FLSA. Subsequently, in 1976, agricultural workers in California became eligible for overtime compensation for all hours worked over 10 hours in any workday and for the first 8 hours on the 7th day of work. Very different standards than those included in the FLSA.
After decades of this norm, AB 1066 has entered the picture. Signed by Governor Brown last September, the new law amends Section 554 of the Labor Code to give agricultural employees the same standards for overtime compensation as other workers. AB 1066 will remove the exemption for agricultural workers that excludes them from the daily and weekly overtime requirements. The standard rule requires overtime compensation for working in excess of 8 hours in one workday or 40 hours in a work week. Once implemented in 2019, it would lower the current 10-hour day threshold for overtime by half an hour each year until it reaches a standard 8-hour day by 2022, also phasing in a 40-hour standard work week for farm workers. One major piece has already come into play. Effective on January 1st, agricultural workers are required to have 1 day of rest in a 7-day week.
Though at first glance it may seem like a minor piece of specialized legislation, the details of AB 1066 reveal a highly contentious law that will have a number of ripple effects. Accordingly, it gained support and opposition from an array of political figures, religious groups, and professional organizations. AB 1066 is now the law, but there are opportunities for amendments, legislative repeal, and executive override. Its consequences are yet to be seen, but it is anticipated that this new law will affect California agriculture, commercial activity, rural economies, and food prices paid by consumers across the nation.
Many people have informed perspectives on the law, and luckily, the farmers market is pretty packed today. I see a farm laborer, farm owner, rural economist, and food consumer advocate all present this afternoon. My pen and paper are ready, and our ears are open and ready to listen. Let's begin with someone who is likely in favor of this new law.
Thank you. My name is Ereth Chavez, and I am a farm laborer here in the Central Valley. When you boil it all down, this new law is about justice and dignity. I'm excited AB 1066 has passed because it puts my fellow farm workers and I on the same playing field as every other blue-collar employee in our state, giving us the opportunity for a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. As an immigrant without other specialized training, I have few options other than to continue to work in California's fields and orchards. However, my paychecks do not reflect how hard I work to get safe, affordable produce to the American consumer. When I'm in the tomato fields, I earn 86 cents for a 5-gallon bucket that will price out at over $15 in the store. When it's the peak of harvest, in the sweltering heat of July, and the crops are ready to come off the vine, my fellow workers and I deserve the extra overtime that comes with those extra hours in the field. It's in farmers' best interest to pay these wages so that California's agricultural productivity is not endangered due to an issue with our labor supply. Last year alone, our state's farmers reported a shortage of farm workers needed to keep our industry alive. With AB 1066, there's enough incentive for those of us who work in the fields to stick around and contribute to our agricultural economy. I'm thrilled that with this new law, the state government has given us the same rights as every other manual worker. AB 1066 affirms the dignity of our work and is an important part of a cure for what has ailed us. AB 1066 has my full support.
Pardon me, I've been listening in and I must offer an opposing opinion on AB 1066. My name is Fabian Rodriguez and I represent the thousands of California farmers who will struggle to keep our operations alive. A farmer like me is like any other business owner and I must keep my costs below my revenue in order to stay afloat. And consumers will only pay so much for their fruits and vegetables. With this government-mandated increase in my operational costs, coupled with an existing labor shortage, I'm forced to respond somehow. I'm not thrilled about any of my options moving forward, but the facts are in my face and I have to do something. A study funded by 11 agricultural organizations indicates labor, already 35% of my operational costs, will increase a whopping 15% under this new law. Some of my fellow producers have already started mechanizing due to an aging workforce with no interest from others to replace them and higher labor and production costs. So then what? Lay off labor or reduce my workers' hours? I've had some employees like Mr. Chavez work for me for over 20 years. No option provides solution. I may be able to survive a while with AB 1066, but I am terrified by the long-term effects of this law. I mean, one estimate expects that AB 1066 could reduce farm output in our state by $5.4 billion. This is senseless. If we value affordable food and the viability of California's #1 industry, we must find a way to repeal AB 1066. It's bad news for California's farmers and no real help to farm workers. AB 1066 does not have my support.
Thank you both. I'm now coming to see that there are far more nuanced impacts on our industry than I saw at first glance. I guess that's the nature of policy. I feel like I get the agricultural arguments, but I am hopeful we could get more information about the impacts this new law will have on the people of our state.
Well, I'd be happy to share my thoughts on that very topic. My name is Claire Nelson, and I work for the Western Law and Poverty Center. First, let me thank you for your thoughtful examination of this law. Second, I will be plain in my support of it because of the impact it will make on our most impoverished agricultural communities. AB 1066 was exactly the prescription we needed to help heal the divide between rich and poor in this state, a divide that is rapidly growing. In fact, the Public Policy Institute of California found that income inequality in California's Central Valley has gotten worse in the last 10 years. And it's not the rich getting richer per se, it's the already very poor, like farm workers, getting even poorer. A recent study by 65 rural California communities indicates that labor-intensive agriculture has been associated with localized poverty and increases unemployment and welfare demands in rural areas. In the average California farm town, nearly a third of the residents live in households with below poverty incomes. In the southern San Joaquin Valley, crop industries within its 3 top farm counties generate more than $7 billion in agricultural revenues annually. And these same counties contain 7 of the poorest communities in California. Let's connect some dots here, people. Poverty of this nature has terrible side effects. Every significant research study correlates poverty to severe health problems, lower educational achievement, and higher crime rates. By improving the incomes of farm workers, our state has now taken a bold step toward ending this horrible cycle of continued poverty in our rural towns. I want Mr. Chavez and his cohorts to have every opportunity to succeed and raise their families in prosperous communities. Let's keep it real. All we ask is that the continued support of this law remind Americans that the cost we pay for our food must fairly support the living wages for our most vulnerable people. AB 1066 was an excellent decision by our state government because it increases the cash flow and investment in rural California, improving local economies with every step. I wholeheartedly support AB 1066.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. I never realized how much a simple law of this nature could really affect people on such a meaningful scale.
Well, if its effects on people you're wondering about, let me remind you that ultimately it's consumers who will bear the greatest burden here. I am Yamilet Diaz, and I work for the Consumer Federation of California. Most importantly, though, I'm a mother who works hard to provide high-quality, affordable meals to my family. After hearing about this new Assembly Bill, 1066, I was shocked that the anticipated increases in the cost of food did not really figure into the discussion. We cannot ignore existing information, people. We just heard about how poor our agricultural communities are. Is AB 1066 going to make it impossible for people who pick tomatoes to actually afford them at the store? We're already struggling with food affordability in our state. 5.4 million Californians, 2 million of whom are children, are considered food insecure, according to data published by our state government. And food insecurity brings about a number of chronic health conditions, largely due to the lack of fresh produce in the diet. Now, AB 1066 is likely to make California's fresh fruits and vegetables completely out of reach for the budget-conscious families in our state. With an expected $1.7 billion food cost increase now foisted upon consumers, was the goal to make our state's produce only affordable for the wealthy? Mr. Rodriguez was correct when he said consumers can only pay so much for our food. Based on budget constraints, we may now be forced to buy imported produce or just cut the fruits and veggies out of our diet. I want to make sure our state's farmers can do their job, but AB 1066 will make this very difficult. Agricultural producers are like any other business, and a cost increase on their end cannot just be absorbed. So, those with tight wallets will find it even harder to afford the labor-intensive fruits and vegetables, which will see the biggest price jumps. All Californians should have access to the produce we grow here in the Golden State, but I don't see that happening thanks to this new law. For the sake of the food on our tables and the health of our people, we must seek repeal. AB 1066 was the wrong move.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz. To be honest, I hadn't even thought about that part of this discussion prior to today. I want to make sure we've captured everything correctly. So would each of you mind quickly summarizing your major thoughts one more time, please?
This law is about justice, fairness, and setting up our farm workers for success. AB 1066 is a win for California's hardworking farm laborers, and we appreciate the government finally recognizing the work we do deserves equal compensation under the law. AB 1066 was a smart choice.
The solution cannot be to increase the burden by placing more regulations on farmers. If we want the Golden State to remain the most productive farm state in the nation, we must find a way to repeal this law. Ultimately, it'll hurt our growers and those who depend on them most. AB 1066 was a bad call.
Raising the standard of living for farm workers is likely to improve the economic equality and living conditions in our most vulnerable agricultural communities. The wise investments associated with AB 1066 will drive rural economic growth for decades to come. AB 1066 was a great move.
Remember that it is always the food consumer who pays the ultimate price when we increase farm costs, and many of our families are already struggling to afford fresh fruits and vegetables. Any uptick in the price of food will hit hardest the vulnerable people who work to provide healthy meals for their families. AB 1066 was an unwise decision.
Thank you all for your arguments and opinions. I have no doubt our paper will thoughtfully include all sides of this issue and ensure that your voices are heard.
As we move forward from here, we can see that even what seem like simple adjustments to laws, like what we are experiencing with AB 1066, will have a number of unanticipated effects. As with any issue, there are pros, there are cons, and there are stakeholders on all sides. Though AB 1066 is now the law in California, history shows us that nothing is really set in stone. It's our job as citizens in this democracy to exercise our rights and let our voices be heard. Thank you. What questions can we answer?
All right. First question. The law from 1976, which you all mentioned, already states that they have to pay overtime for anything over 10 hours, correct?
Yes.
And so we're really only looking at this impacting an additional 2 hours a day. So the $1.7 billion impact that you all mentioned in your portfolio, and you mentioned reducing farm output by $5.4 billion, is that just from this additional 2 hours, or is that overtime as a whole?
Well, as we see in our local community, according to the San Joaquin Ag Commission, our community alone generates a gross income of about $2.3 billion. And so we are already in a labor shortage. So with this new law, we could possibly see a big impact on this. And a big agricultural commodity in our area is actually asparagus. And these asparagus farms are already down 66% in acreage because of lost labor. So we can even see a bigger impact in our community because of this law coming to play.
I noticed when you gave your local forums, you had at least 2 on each side, 2 for the pro, 2 for the con. It's a very emotional issue. What kind of reaction did you get when you went to these groups, and do you see a way of increasing or improving communication between these opposing sides?
When we went to both groups, we saw that people were either thrilled about the law and the implications of overtime and extra pay, or people were terrified of the economic implications on California's agricultural industry. And so I believe a better way to communicate this between both sides is a possible discussion of a compromise within the law. When we visited California Secretary of Agriculture, Karen Ross, she noted that both sides should compromise on a 48-hour work week because that meets in the middle of 60 hours and 40 hours. And also a way to bank hours, because currently farm workers do not have a clause in the law to bank hours. So as we see with last year's rainfall in California and this year's wildfires, those farm workers lost out on wages and they have no way of making them up. So that's a common argument that could be made on a compromise.
What does it mean to bank hours?
Bank hours means if a farm worker were to lose hours because of sick pay or weather, they would have an alternative method to make up those hours so it's just not lost income on their end.
Explain to me the relationship, how both of you see the relationship between changes in agricultural wages and mechanization, because the argument's been used on both sides.
So we actually definitely have to find a fine line between having these agricultural workers and mechanization. As California produces 2/3 of the nation's fruits and vegetables, we cannot simply just stop growing these fruits and vegetables. For example, if we start to import, the U.S. actually has one of the highest food safety standards, so Americans should not be excited about importing foods. So a good compromise would try to find a balance between having these workers and having mechanization.
But also, if he uses mechanization, then he's going to have to make sure to use mechanization for the right fruits and vegetables. Because, for example, tomatoes and any other soft-skinned fruits are going to need hand labor, because the hand knows when it's ready, but mechanization can actually bruise it. And if that goes into the store, the customers won't find it eye-appealing and they won't want to buy it. So they have to figure out what crops are going to need mechanization and what's going to need hand labor.
In California, there are farm worker groups, unions and other groups. What role did they play in getting this legislation passed, and what role are they playing now in its implementation?
Unions are actually exempt from this law, so if people want to not, if farm workers are scared of getting their hours cut because farmers won't be able to pay that overtime, they can join a union and they won't be affected by it.
So for example, as we learned from our forum with the United Farm Workers, they are actually very excited that this law is passed because they could possibly see an increase in their membership, because as my fellow companion said, that farm workers will actually be exempt from this law if they unionize.
You mentioned in your portfolio that 4 other states give farm workers overtime similar to what this law does. How has this impacted their workforce, and what are those 4 other states?
Those 4 other states are Minnesota, Massachusetts, New York, and Hawaii, and recently in the last couple months that wasn't mentioned in our portfolio is Maryland. So this will have an impact on them because to begin with, California was the first state to legislate farm worker overtime. So we'll see that carrying on effect, and we want them to make sure, we'll see that carry on effect, and as they followed us, they might carry on with this law also.
If I may add on, there's this saying that says, if California goes, so goes the nation. So the other states are practically correlating to our process of minimum wage. So that means if other states are doing it, maybe other states will continue to do it as well.
With agriculture producers being opposed to this legislation, it seems that the image of producers could be hurt because of not being willing to do what's right for people. Do you think the image of producers has been hurt with this position, and what can be done to improve producers' image?
Well, as we learned from our forum with Full Belly Farm, actually producers really care about their workers. They actually want to keep providing them with a good salary, and actually Full Belly Farm, they give them health benefits, and they give them places to live and help them out with mortgages on their home. So producers actually care about their workers, and they do not want to see them lay off hours.
In addition, I believe that this law has put a negative image on producers just because producers don't have that much money to make up for this overtime. And I believe a way to kind of negate that image is the communication of the economic implications and the reality that producers actually don't make the billions of dollars that is generated through ag, and so that they don't really have the economic resources to pay this overtime.
I want to go back to the point about as California goes, so goes the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So if California does this and this stays in place, what do you think is going to happen to agricultural wages and the availability of agricultural labor in other states?
Well, California, because of the political impacts on farm workers are actually not starting to work with California now. They're starting to just stay in their own place, and we have a shortage in labor workers. So now California will probably see a shortage in more shortage on workers, and their wages will go down.
And if I could add on to that, the people are staying to work in their countries because, for example, Mexico has been industrializing, so they've been opening up more jobs. So the people would rather stay back in Mexico than come do the same job over here when there's anti-immigrant sentiments here, so they don't feel the pressure or they don't feel attacked. And since most of farm workers are Mexican nationals, there's about 74%, so they would rather stay back in their hometown or their home country.
You mentioned that the passage of this bill may affect food prices outside of California. Can you give us any examples of where that has happened already and to what extent has it impacted food prices?
Well, in the country of Japan and Nigeria, food prices have already increased because Japan food income for their population was 12%, but it has increased to 21% in the past 5 years. And Nigeria was 5.2%, and now it has increased 9.9%.
If I may clarify, a prime example would be avocados, because if you're buying an avocado in a state such as Montana, it's a lot more expensive.
Your time is up. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes the third presentation for the Agricultural Issues Forum. We will now provide a few moments for judges to score and the stage to be reset. If you must leave the auditorium, please do so at this time. If you are just now joining us, please take a moment to silence all electronic devices, including cell phones. This is to ensure that all teams are provided a fair environment. Thank you for your cooperation. We are about to begin the fourth presentation of the Agricultural Issues Forum. Would the courtesy corps please secure the hallways and doors? I will now introduce our judges and timekeeper for the event. Mr. Gary Fueller, Elanco Animal Health. Ms. Dana Parrott, Cooperative Extension Service. Dr. Lori Gartovic, University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. Mr. Bruce By, National Agricultural Issues Committee member. Our timekeeper for today is Dr. Randall Williams with Texas A&M Kingsville. Please join me in thanking our judges and timekeeper. Our fourth team is from the Fayetteville City FFA chapter in the state of Tennessee. The team members include Eli Dotson, Ruthie Rulander, Gunnar Terhune, Richard Bryant, Madison Phillips, Aaron Wakefield, and Carly Wakefield.
Can I help you, ma'am? I'm waiting on my date, and he's late. I just can't believe that I left work early to come here.
Really? Where do you work?
I'm a vet, but I operate large equipment on the side. I just can't believe that I actually tried one of those online dating sites.
Which one?
FarmersOnly.com. Well, I think I'm just gonna go.
That darn Prius took up 2 spots and I couldn't get my truck in.
Can I help you, sir?
Supposed to meet a girl here. Have you seen her?
Oh, she just left.
Oh, she probably wasn't the one anyway.
No, dude, she was definitely the one. She was a vet who could drive a bulldozer.
Oh man, she was the one.
So why were you late anyways?
I had to go to my local vet clinic and get a veterinary feed directive for these new regulations on my antibiotics. She would have totally understood.
City folks just don't get it. Many people don't quite understand what a veterinary feed directive, or VFD, is and how it's affecting both producers and consumers alike. A VFD is a statement authorizing the owners of animals to obtain and use animal feed containing prescription medications that were previously available over the counter in order to meet the new regulations of the Food and Drug Administration that were put into effect January 1st of 2017. Today, we will explore how these regulations will affect the agriculture industry both positively and negatively. We will hear from Richard Bryant, an FDA representative, Ruthie Rulander, a Tennessee Farmers Cooperative feed distributor, Gunnar Terhune, an everyday consumer, Aaron Wakefield, a writer for the local Elk Valley Times, Madison Phillips, a local veterinarian, and Eli Dotson, a livestock producer in Lincoln County, the #1 cattle producing county in the state of Tennessee. Finally, I'm Carly Wakefield, a Fayetteville City FFA member and your waitress here at the Fayetteville City Diner. Let's see what's cooking.
Did you say you were a cattle farmer?
Yeah, that's right.
Hi, I'm Richard Bryant, and I work with the United States Food and Drug Administration and help implement those regulations you were talking about.
Oh, so it's your fault we have all this headache? Now all of us producers have to make sure we have a vet-client relationship with our veterinarians, and it's increasingly difficult for my friends who live in even more rural areas than me to get this relationship.
Calm down. The regulations put into effect January 1st, 2017 to change the labels of medically important antimicrobial drugs in the feed and water of livestock was only to eliminate their usage to enhance growth or improve feed efficiency. This wasn't about attacking the farmer. This was about public health.
Public health? 66% of Lincoln County's revenue comes from cow-calf operations like mine.
Public health is a much larger issue than your profit margin. Last year, the Center for Disease Control reported 23,000 deaths and 2 million illnesses due to antimicrobial resistance in the United States alone.
23,000 deaths related to what kind of resistance and whose fault was it?
Don't go pointing at me. I use antibiotics responsibly. I didn't need all these new regulations adding to my annual expenses.
But don't these expenses just fall back on the consumer anyway?
Seeing that I only get 11 cents for each dollar, this is really going to cut into my profits. The agricultural industry is an industry measured pennies per pound. This is really going to take a toll on Lincoln County's industry and economy as a whole. $73.4 million is generated each year. And just keep in mind that if my expenses go up, the consumers go up as well.
When it comes down to the wire, this is a consumer-driven industry, and I am the consumer. Everything falls into what I want, and I want a safe food supply no matter the cost. I even saw where in 2006, Europe implemented similar changes.
The FDA is striving to supply our consumers with the safest food supply, while also making it feasible for the farmer. This is why we only changed the labels of antibiotics that were essentially related to human medicine.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you talking about the Veterinary Feed Directive?
Yep, we sure are. The one that affects bison, honeybees, turkey, and livestock alike.
Well, I work at Tennessee Farmers Cooperative, and let me tell you, at the end of 2016, we had to throw away 15,000 tons of feed because it had been pre-mixed with antibiotics, which were now on a list, which requires a prescription.
Has anyone seen my purse?
Wait, are you the vet I was supposed to go on a date with?
Well, maybe, but now I've got to go.
Before you go, can we get your opinion on something first?
Well, I guess so.
How is the Veterinary Feed Directive affecting you and your practice?
After January 1st of 2017, I'm now required to authorize the use of antibiotics in the feed and water of livestock. This is adding a lot of liability for me and my practice.
I had to get a VFD today. That's why I was late.
No way. Your vet called in your custom order to co-op earlier today, and I took down the request. What are you using the chlorotetracycline to treat in your herd?
We're experiencing some respiratory issues. The vet was at my house for an hour and it cost me $250. But the vet got the VFD out in a timely manner after coming out and looking over my herd. Although that may seem expensive, that VFD is now valid for 2 years. But I couldn't just call it in. All vet-client relationships have to be done in person and not over the phone.
That makes sense. Chlorotetracycline is the most common used antibiotic in livestock feed.
You're right, Ruthie. Chlorotetracycline is found in name brand drugs such as auramycin. And while they were once used to enhance growth and improve feed efficiency, now they can only be used to treat bacterial illnesses.
Taking antibiotics like these out of feed and water for growth and improvement doesn't come without a cost, though. It is estimated that producers lose 1 to 3% in their livestock operations depending on the size and scale of their enterprise.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I've been doing some research myself for an article I'm writing for our local Elk Valley Times newspaper, but I still have some questions. Y'all talked a lot about regulations, but what happens if producers, veterinarians, or the feed distributors aren't following those regulations in accordance to the law?
Producers who violate these regulations can be subject to jail time, loss of land, and fines, while veterinarians and feed distributors could lose their license.
This is adding a lot of stress for those of us at Fayetteville Animal Clinic.
Us too at Tennessee Farmers Cooperative.
When did you say your article was coming out?
Next week, I'm publishing an article on how antibiotic resistance actually works.
Now that you bring it up, I was pretty interested in this topic too. Can you tell me more about it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. But first, it's important to know that just like humans, animals carry bacteria in their intestines. You see, giving an animal an antibiotic will kill many of the bacteria, but the remaining resistant bacteria will survive and multiply. These resistant bacteria can be spread through contaminated water and soil, food surfaces, or by handling or eating raw or undercooked meat.
That's right. About 1 in 5 cases of antimicrobial resistance are due to resistant bacteria in food or water.
I hate to butt in, but we just finished a lesson on this in my agri-science class. My advisor was super hyped up about it, but I had no idea how much it was affecting the community until I started working here. I started overhearing conversations about how it's affecting everyone around the county, but surprisingly enough, it's not causing an inflation in prices for the hospitality industry.
Oh wow, I would love to get your side to the story if you have a minute.
Of course. You see, it's basically coming down to the public's perception of the agriculture industry. We have customers who are coming in now and don't realize that as long as their meat is cooked thoroughly, they're safe. Many are under the impression that they'll get sick just from eating meat nowadays.
Honestly, that was the impression that I was under. There has to be at least a little bit of truth behind that statement though, right?
Of course, you see, when you order a burger, it's extremely important that you make sure it's cooked all the way through, because when the meat is first being processed, it's ground up all together. If there's any bacteria on the blade to begin with, all of the meat is now contaminated. If you order a steak, however, you only have to make sure the outside edges are cooked, because only the edges would be contaminated.
I honestly didn't know that.
This has really helped me type my article. I can't thank y'all enough for your help. I'd like to share a little piece of it with you guys real fast, if that's okay.
I'd love to hear it.
Great. So locally, all areas of production are being affected. Local producers are stuck between a rock and a hard place when they are driven by consumer expectations. Yet, they still have a bottom line to cover as they are losing profits by decreases in efficiencies and growth with the obligations of VFDs going into effect. Veterinarians are faced with greater obligations with the requirements to write feed directives and the obligation to keep them on file for 2 years. While this comes with a sense of liability and responsibility, vets understand why these changes have gone into effect. It's about public safety and the longevity of our food supply.
I think that covers everything very well.
As we can see, the veterinary feed directive is affecting many areas of the agriculture industry. American consumers have always wanted the cheapest yet safest food supply in the world. These prices will ultimately be passed on to them with a predicted 1% spike in grocery store prices. But consumers are taking the threat of antibiotic resistance seriously, and this has been a driving force behind these new regulations. It's easy to see with just a short conversation at the Fayetteville City Diner how there's always more than one side to a story. That's why it's important to hear all sides and then decide where to stand.
So now that you know I was getting a VFD today, are you going to give me another shot?
Well, I guess I'll let it slide, but you're going to have to ditch that other vet.
You don't have to be lonely at farmersonly.com.
I'd like you to talk about the effect or the capacity of the veterinary system, the number of vets and their distribution across the United States, and the requirements under the VFDs. Do we have the ability to address that?
I can answer that. As far as vets as a whole, there's a misconception here. They think that vets will be stretched too thin and that we won't have enough to be able to keep up with the extra responsibility of having to go out to the different operations and write all of these veterinary feed directives. However, we have 15% more vets than what we currently have a use for. So this is only going to provide more opportunities for that 15%. And as far as regulations go, it's not completely falling on the veterinarian. The feed producer, the feed distributor, and the producer are both required to keep these paperwork on file and make sure that it is maintained for that 2-year period.
I can add to that, ma'am. It is also really important for vets for job opportunity, because big corporations such as Tyson are hiring on-site vets to be able, so they don't have to call a vet every time they need a veterinary feed directive.
In your presentation, you documented that this ban has been in effect in Europe since 1999. Since that time, has the actual use of antibiotics, the overall use of antibiotics in animals, increased or decreased, and why?
I can answer that. So Europe was kind of more proactive in their regulations than compared to America. They kind of got on the ball a little bit earlier than us. But as far as the decreases go, I was actually reading an article the other day that just came out from NARMS, which is the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, and they've actually found that since then there has been a decrease in antimicrobial resistance from those bans.
What about the use of antibiotics, overall use of antibiotics themselves?
Yes, sir. For Europe, they have been decreasing their use of antibiotics, so they think that that is a direct correlation from the antimicrobial resistance and the antibiotic use.
Are the veterinarians in your state generally in favor or against the veterinary feed directives, and why?
I can answer that. In our state, there are quite a bit of veterinarians that are in favor of this because it's all coming down to what the consumers want, and they want a safe food supply. However, this is going to be a lot of liability on them because they'll have to keep the paperwork for 2 years and keep track of all of these papers and VFDs with all of their customers.
I also have a question about Europe and the way that they're doing things. Since 1999, you mentioned that they've been devoting their focus to various surveillance programs to enforce this, which is obviously an issue with this. Can you give me any examples of how Europe is incorporating these surveillance methods?
Can you repeat the question, ma'am?
Since Europe's last ban in 1999, they have been devoting their focus to the surveillance of this, so enforcing it, basically. Can you tell me some ways that they are doing this?
I can answer that. As far as Europe goes, we kind of took the turn and kept it more local. So we really focused on the United States and Tennessee. And there was one case where, now this falls under the Food and Drug Care Act. So that's the same act that veterinary feed directives fall under. And it was a case where a couple with an operation got taken to jail. They had $1.5 million in fines, and they were sentenced to 6 years in prison because of adding in things into, it was actually cantaloupes in their instance. It wasn't for livestock, but that was a case that where they were proactive with mandating these regulations and putting in place fines and other forms of punishment.
I can add to that. Europe is much like the United States in their regulations, how they have the main thing, and then it goes down into smaller sections of who is actually regulating those. So it goes from a bigger branch and then separates into smaller, and those are the ones that are regulating their bans.
Are you aware of any classes of antibiotics that are used in animals that are not used in humans?
I can answer that. An antibiotic that is not used in humans but can still be used in animals without a VFD is rumensin. Now, rumensin is an antibiotic used in ruminant animals such as cattle. And the reason this is not human medically important is because cows have ruminant systems and humans do not.
Talk about the challenges of comparing the relative economic risks and benefits of this VFD in the ag sector versus figuring out the economic and other risks of not doing this in terms of public health.
I can answer that, ma'am. The reason that they're doing it now is because if we would not have done this and on down the road, if we would not have done this now, they could have shut it down to where you could not put any medication in feed or water. And that would have really hurt the agricultural industry as a whole. And it would have definitely punished a lot of farmers to where they would lose a lot of money in their livestock because they could not put any medication in feed or water.
I can add to that. Producers are seeing a 1 to 3% increase in production costs, as the poultry industry sees a 2 to 4% increase. That's why the consumers have a 1% spike in grocery store prices to balance out that cost.
I can add to that. Because of these regulations and these companies cannot have antibiotics that are used for preventatives anymore in their feeds, they're using a lot of times the public's lack of knowledge of withdrawal periods and the fact that when you get your meat in the store, there's no antibiotics in it. So from a marketing perspective, they're using that to say, we have no antibiotics ever in our food.
You mentioned the impact of feed, of the veterinary feed directive of the in-feed antibiotics. What about the water antibiotics? What is the impact of the veterinary feed directive of the water antibiotics?
I can answer that. So just like the regulations with the feed, the antibiotics being pre-mixed into the feed. It is the same thing with water. We see with water-soluble antibiotics, producers can have antibiotics and mix them into their water supply and feed their animals that water. It's the same concept with the feed regulations. It falls under the same things as the VFDs. So those antibiotics that were once been able to put in the water, they follow under the regulations of the VFDs as well.
So since this is already in effect and we say it's causing issues, how else could we address this issue besides with something like the VFD?
I can answer that. Some producers are beginning to put clay and oregano into their feed to build up their livestock's immune system instead of trying to get VFDs to put more antibiotics in their feed.
I can add to that. Since we're using VFDs in the agriculture industry, another approach that could be possible is from the medical field for human medications is taking less, like keeping smaller dosage for human medications instead of just relying on VFDs for animals.
During the presentation, you commented that you want to be able to have food safe and it doesn't matter what it costs. What's your documentation that individuals are not sensitive about the price of food?
Consumers in general, when they are scared by a topic.
Your time is now complete. Thank you again for your presentation.
This concludes the Agricultural Issues Forum's finals. Congratulations to all FFA members in this event who have achieved student success in representing the issues important to their home and communities. Join me in showing appreciation for all of the participants, judges, and timekeepers. The national winning team will be announced during the 9th general session this Saturday afternoon, starting at 1:30 p.m. at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. I hope to see you there. Our first day of the National Finals Hall has come to a close. All of the FFA members on this stage have demonstrated that they have the skills most sought out after by today's employers. Skills that will benefit them in their careers and their futures. I encourage you to come back tomorrow to see the finals in marketing plan, creed speaking, conduct of chapter meetings, and parliamentary procedure events. Thank you for attending. Have a great afternoon as you enjoy the 90th National FFA Convention and Expo.